this one links up a lot to chart the direction.
Hmm.
So the way we make progress directionally is by running something in complexity theory that they call safe to fail experiments,
Hmm.
where you run things that are safe, micro experiments, to see if you're getting closer to unlocking the problem.
Hmm.
And when we think about complex environments, this is really the only way forward, because you don't know ultimately the destination. You really don't. So the way you make progress is by running experiments and then seeing, did this experiment, what parts of this experiment worked? Did it not work? Okay, now that I know that, what new experiment do I want to run here? And so you just start making some like experimental moves. And to be geeky for just one moment, this is important because this is how systems actually work. So if you look at systems theory, like out of the Santa Fe Institute, who study a lot about complex systems, there's no such thing as a huge overhaul of a complex system. All there is nudging and experimentation. So that's the background and sort of scientifically why this works, is because if you want to make innovation and you want to get a system to change, the best thing you can do is experiment and nudge against it versus try to do a large scale transformation, if you will. And that's, of course, the opposite of being metric driven, which is a set of KPIs that you're targeting. That is very much about the direction. And did we meet those KPIs? An illusion that if we meet these KPIs, then we're going to be successful and the transformation is going to be successful. And because I work inside organization change and culture a lot, we see this happen a lot inside of like culture change efforts. We ask the question, well, what are the metrics that people are changing, for example? Or what are we trying to get people to do in the long run, for example? Versus instead saying, directionally, what kind of culture are we trying to build? And then what experiments could we run? And then what are the small signals that it's actually working? So for example, if you're dealing with a collaboration issue, you could start nudging against the system and experiment by, offering people some money to go out to coffee together if they happen to be in the same city and they haven't seen each other in ages, right? There's no real KPI around that, except for seeing, if people are starting to act differently together. And you learn that by seeing how people behave. And then if that little experiment didn't work, then you need to try something else to see how else you can get people to sort of collaborate and be together differently. And so it's a slight distinction between having a master plan and then sort of nudging instead of trying to set down clear metrics against something that you don't know exactly how it's going to change.
It sounds to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the order is really important here, right? Where I think a lot of times we set out, we say, okay, I want to improve these metrics, and then I'm going to run experiments to see if the metrics improve. And what I hear you saying is, okay, let's throw away the traditional metrics for a moment, and let's design an experiment that's in the direction of what we're trying to improve. And then as we begin the experiment and we kind of define what it is that we're trying to tease out, now we can have a shorter term metric that is still a metric, but it's going to be different because we're much more open to measuring something that we didn't even think we would initially want to measure, right? It's a much smaller step. That's
exactly it. Thank you. That is a wonderful summary. Exactly. And I think when we think about burnout, the reason why innovation can often lead to burnout, in my estimation, is that you're saying be innovative, run experiments, but then you're holding this metric over someone. That's a big metric that has organizational implications. That is very stressful. And it's the opposite of creating space for the innovation and the learning. I mean, another way to say it is what you're doing is you're learning as you go versus setting up metrics as you go. Metrics inside an organization has a very specific feel and tone that makes people stressed.
Mm. This kind of reminds me of Daniel Pink's work from his book Drive, where he was talking
Mm,
about how, if you give somebody any type of problem that requires complex thinking, as soon as there's an incentive, i.e., a metric, is what you're pointing out to,
yes,
then performance goes down. Right?
that's right.
If it's a rudimentary task, incentives work great, but as soon as complex thinking is involved, you're actually inhibiting performance by having these incentives or these metrics that you're trying to hit. And my guess is, from what you're saying, that's because we probably don't think as creatively or as out of the box if we're under stress, right? If we feel that pressure of trying to hit a metric or KPI.
Absolutely. And that's where the play also comes in. So
Mm,
these sort of five components, they work together.
mm,
And I'm glad you brought up Daniel Pink's book, because that book is really exceptional in terms of thinking about motivation inside an organization, but it's also useful when we think about sort of unlocking people's innovative and creative spirit. We have that inside of us, but it's not from the industrial era way of managing people is not going to get us there. And I think that's a lot of what Daniel Pink is sort of unlocking, is motivation lives inside of us. And a
mm,
lot of these architectures that we put inside organizations, what they do is they dampen that versus
mm,
illuminate it.
mm. And so these 5 steps that you're talking about work in synergy to, instead of dampening that creative spirit and the ability to
Yes.
innovate, it's actually creating more space for it and making it more likely to happen.
Yeah. So these would be the organizational conditions where innovation, agility can thrive. And then you, not at the cost of burnout. That was the big question, right? So
Right.
I encourage every organization to think about these as levers. Sort of these are the innovative levers. So if I take these five, do a little sort of assessment on where are you in terms of
Mm,
embodying these, what's getting in the way. And then in the experiment, in the interest of experimentation, then the question is, where can we experiment with something else versus sort of how do we overhaul, which I think is the wrong question. It's more, where might we be able to make some micro changes inside our culture to see if we can lessen the burnout and get more innovation and creativity.